Hello, Eurovision fans. This is that Eurovision site, Eurovision with a slice of life. My name is Ewan. My pronouns here he and him, if I can actually remember my pronouns. And joining me today is,
Our name's Jonathan. My pronouns also he, him.
and today we're going to be discussing something a little bit special. It's nearly a year away, but to Eurovision 2025. But we're Eurovision fans. We need to speculate and argue about things. So we're going to be discussing the potential host cities. So there was originally four host cities, but unfortunately Bern and Zurich are now out, leaving us with just Geneva and Basel. Today we're going to be discussing Geneva. So it's the second largest city in Switzerland, and it's sort of like the heart of the Romandy, the French-speaking section of Switzerland. It's right on the west, and it's home to so many like international events. The United Nations, the World Health Organizations, and of course the big one, the European Broadcasting Union. So, Jonathan, have you had any experience with the city itself? What do you think of it?
I have Geneva is one of the few places in Switzerland I haven't made it out to because it is a very far west. It's quite almost disconnected from the rest of the country. It's its own little microcosm of sort of Geneva-ness uh, on the border with France, full of it's a kind of a world city. As you said, it's got sort of more international organizations than you can list. So it's got its own identity as part of this sort of like in the same way that kind of Brussels and Strasbourg do in their own ways of being like just full of expats and full of people like a very kind of transient population of people who come in for a year or people who are visiting for conferences. Um, yeah, it's I kind of see why these two cities have ended up being the choices, just because they're in Geneva's case set up for this kind of event and less likely to kind of be as busy because Bern, you've got the capital of the Swiss government. That's kind of not there's not much else around there. They had this idea of doing it in a co-hosting with BLBean, which would have been a bit weird and a bit of a mess. And
Yeah,
Zurich
because
just
they're
has
just for context for those who aren't fully aware, BLBN is not that close to Bern. It's a good way away, like
yeah,
more
it's
than
about it's about
Copenhagen, Malmo.
oh yeah, it's not it's day trip worthy, but it's a kind of schlep getting back there and back. You do have late trains, but it's not like Copenhagen and Malmo where you get to it's the whole this sort of one functioning economy. Bielbian was basically just it's sort of just a transit town because it's on the main line between Bern, Zurich, and Geneva. Uh, so Geneva makes sense to me as a choice to include because it is so geared towards welcoming people. It's got a huge amount of hotel rooms. Um, its arena is it's a bit kind of I mean, it's a little arena that's right next to the airport. It's almost made for it's literally designed to just host people, get them in, get them out as fast as you can. You also have great transport links out to France, which I think is probably the big thing about Switzerland is that it is insanely expensive to do anything there, to stay, to eat, to go for a drink, to enjoy yourself. And I suppose Geneva being so close to France and so like interconnected with that economy maybe makes it a bit easier for people.
Mm. I was quite surprised that because like obviously like okay Geneva where it is and how you actually like properly looking like yeah it really is just in a world of its own just like almost surrounded on three sides by France, and I was quite surprised like it's not just like with Basel where it's basically like countryside and from this French German borders. It really looks quite dense,
Mm.
so there is a big advantage because of course yeah it's obscenely expensive in Switzerland. um so yeah, I think there is a really strong advantage for it hosting for Eurovision fans wanting to go because they can stay in France because you also have like those tram lines that go into Amarcy. I'm not actually quite sure how you
Amnesty, yeah,
pronounce
yeah, yeah.
yeah, Amarcy and things like that, which was what a good thing about Malmo because Malmo didn't have great hotel spaces, but they did have that great connection to like Lund and Copenhagen. So yeah, I do think there's strength there. I think with the arena, because it's not that is a bit of a weakness compared to some of the other ones because it's an event space like an
Mm.
exhibition center rather than a dedicated music venue.
Yeah.
And look, I've not been in the place, so I haven't heard the acoustics, but the acoustics in those places tend not to be fantastic. I do think it makes sense that like this was one of the ones that was shortlisted because in the last few days prior to the announcement, you had all of the controversy because Zurich, um, they were wanting to use charity money, and there was controversy on how they were going to actually fund it. And then, of course, like the Bern was where they kickstarted the whole referendums on whether or not Eurovision will end up being hosted in Switzerland. So, knocking on wood, it will be hosted there. Um, yeah, do you think that you would go if it were Geneva, or do you think that this will affect like it being in Geneva would affect you?
Um, if you're if you're the kind of person who would just go to Eurovision and you weren't put off by going to Sweden, then going to Switzerland isn't that much of a jump up. And even it's a bit of a kind of, especially in modern Eurovision, we've not had the chance to go to Switzerland. They
Hmm.
don't even have, proper national finals. So there's nothing you can attend. There's nothing you can kind of like go and see like kind of link those two loves together. So I wouldn't be put off by it. Um, yeah, just going back to sort of like these other places dropping out. And I see Geneva really as the sort of functional choice. Basel's kind of an ideological choice because it's an artistic city, but Geneva is just a really functional, like we will be safe doing a big event in Geneva. Um, and yeah, and that kind of loses some of its excitement in a sense because it's a quite a formal place from my understanding of what people who've been there have said. It's kind of quite it is transient. It is business like, and you have an arena that's next to an airport that's really not set up to be a theater of dreams, a kind of where the world comes to kind of come alive. It's just a kind of like it's a big empty box next to an airport on the edge of a city, and
Although
there's
to
not
be
much
fair,
romance about it.
Eurovision
It is quite good at that,
venues
yeah.
are do have a tendency to be in places like that.
Yeah,
Just thinking
uh,
back to the weird exhibition center that Kiev was in, right in the middle of nowhere on the other side of the city.
yeah. And I suppose we
Um,
got spoiled by Liverpool just being like the M&S Arena being there
mm,
on the waterfront.
yeah, or like the fair enough with like Lisbon as well, because it's like yeah, there were such
Yeah.
great places. I do think that what you're saying is like it being a transit city, it could be a disadvantage to it because it's so focused on business events and things like this. So like when they're saying like, okay, we have all these things, we've hosted all of these things, they're not really fun
They're not
things. It's
exciting
like, yeah,
events.
we
Yeah.
hosted
The
this conference,
conference,
we held this conference, and it's like,
a summit.
yeah,
Yeah.
that if you want to wear a business suit and put
Yeah.
everything on your expenses, that within it's great. But I want to drape myself in a flag and get drunk in a bar and sing Eurovision songs. Is it going to have that? But with it being like you're saying, it's like a place where there's lots of expats that go there for like potentially a year or a shorter period of time. Is it going to be as say welcoming as somewhere that's so used to tourists in a different sense? Because like okay, yeah, there's lots of people here. They're just annoying, taking up the whole city, like what we saw in Malmo, because people were quite pissed off at
Mm.
the tourists. Would that be a disadvantage, do you think, compared to some of the other Swiss cities?
Well, I think, especially if we go and bring it back to Malmö, the dynamic of that was so different.
Hmm.
In a Eurovision is in a really tricky place, in a really tricky discursive space right now. Like it can't really, it can, it can. Hmm. Yeah, Eurovision is a really tricky space right now because it can't really win.
Hmm.
It can't really win against itself, and it can't really win against its fans. Um, and it can't really win against the cities it's being hosted in, which is one of the reasons why another reason why they probably took it out of Bern, because Bern is a very strong history of protesting, a very strong kind of quite full of anarchist of heart to it. And I think Geneva, if it was a normal year, I don't think Geneva would be annoyed by the presence of Eurovision fans in the city. I think it'd probably be quite fun for it because it doesn't really get to host these big kind of events. Switzerland doesn't get to host these big kind of international events. The last kind of major thing that happened to it was the Euros between Switzerland and us. host produced for in Austria. That's what 2008, whatever it was. So I think they would be welcomed.
I'm more just
But
thinking like in the
would
current
Eurovision at
um
what it is now be welcomed?
but I think not just in terms of Eurovision be welcome, but in the current climate there particularly this year more so there's been a lot more anti-tourism backlash. So 15 to 20,000 annoying loud Eurovision fans, because let's face it, we're not quiet
Yeah,
people.
yeah.
Uh that's what I was more thinking in terms of like would it
Oh, would we just be
alienate
annoying? Would we
people?
just stand out a bit?
Mm.
I don't think it's that because it is still a functioning city, it's a working city. Um, yeah, but we're not that annoying. We're only annoying if you. I mean, Liverpool seems to do it quite well. I mean, most cities still do quite well and quite enjoy the experience of having Eurovision because we're not a disruptive audience per se, or
Yeah,
not as disruptive.
I do think a good strength in
We
it
do.
is which basically for all of the cities, maybe not necessarily what Zurich would have been, is they're not very big cities.
Mm,
Um, so it feels like it could definitely be a place that could fully embrace Eurovision,
yeah,
rather than just being a huge place where it's swallowed up. Because sometimes when it's been hosted in a city that's just too big for the content, it just feels like it's not really embraced, even though they've
yeah.
attempted to do it. And it's sort of like it's quite jarring. With Geneva, though, there is an elephant in the room, because this is the headquarters of the European Broadcasting Union, and we did see a lot of protest in Malmo
Hmm.
because of the inclusion of Israel. I do wonder, would they want to host it in Geneva so they can be more in control of the narrative and oversee it? Because the Palo Expo is, I think I saw that it's only like 15-minute walk. It's
Yeah,
super close to the
round the
actual
corner.
EBU
Yeah.
headquarters. So would they want that? But there is the risk of then constant protests.
I think
So
there's a risk of constant protests as it is.
mhm.
That's just something that the EBU has to deal with, and that's kind of why I think Geneva is a functional choice. Because if there's one city in Switzerland that is used to having a large amount of protests happening, it's the city with basically all the world's institutions in it. There's almost constantly some kind of protest or demonstration or something happening in Geneva, and I imagine they've got a security system and an infrastructure set up to know, like, actually deal with that. Like they will know how to handle this kind of like situation. Is it going to be comfortable? No. And this is kind of the weird thing about going into this 2025 season. It's kind of uncomfortable. The whole thing is uncomfortable. And even having Geneva as a host is uncomfortable because it is going to be so hung up on the fact that you can just go and, disrupt the EBU at source. You don't have to disrupt Martin style. You could go and disrupt people going to work and make an issue. And I don't know, there's this, yeah, like a Eurovision is kind of at this weird crossroads where it's been this beautiful artistic thing and this beautiful creative thing for so long. And now it's kind of becoming a very formalized, very kind of financially driven, much about the numbers, about the sponsorships, about saving face, about being, you know, um, clean and presentable to the rest of Europe. Um, and so even within like this Geneva Basel thing, you get that kind of dichotomy of like it's kind of holding on to this narrative and going, okay, yeah, we can control it. It's in Geneva, we can police it well, but we can hold it in a expo center next to an airport in a city that's not known for its culture, in a city that's not known for it for being it's known for being a world city, but not in a kind of fun Belgrade, you know, what was that slogan they used?
Confluence of sound. Yeah.
Confluence of sound. Yeah, not in that kind of fun way. And they're very much like, we have a good we have a good airport and good train links to France. Like that's not exciting. It's not artistic,
Mm.
but it is what that kind of bit of Eurovision, that kind of like fine, that suited and booted, that um meetings in boardrooms Eurovision would probably like it to be.
Mm. Just touching on what you said about good links to France, the airport that they have is fantastic, and it is
Oh,
also in great. Well, I say fantastic. I'm just talking from my research because I paid £350 to get to Copenhagen, and it would only be 120 to go to Geneva. So in my eyes, it's the best airport in the world because that would be the cheapest that I've ever paid for Eurovision tickets, for Eurovision flights. But also, it's so close to Lyon.
Yeah.
uh, it really wouldn't take. It would be such a strength there. But it's also if they're really wanting to go towards the making Eurovision seem greener as well. It has great rail links with the rest of Europe, which I
Hmm.
think you're probably a bit more qualified to speak than I am. Yeah, do you think that's a factor in their choosing?
I
The,
think about Geneva is it's kind of only really connected to France. It's really easy to get to from France, like
the,
even really easy to get to from Paris and Lyon and the southeast of France. It's not as easy to get to from other parts of Europe. Um, it doesn't have sleeper train connections to anywhere else in Europe, which Basel doesn't, but Zurich does. Um, and you can get to and it's like 5 hours from Zurich to Geneva, something like 45 minutes from Zurich to Basel, 55. So I don't think it's a green city. Switzerland's a more green country, and Geneva's certainly a very green city. Um, but I don't really think and I don't think Eurovision's really been that. It's not really made that quite as central part of his marketing as I thought it would do, especially being in
well,
Sweden.
they did try last year in terms of like the postcards and saying like
Oh yeah.
the environmentalism, while they also collaborate with a cruise company. So like,
And a booking, yeah. Like you know, show me some environmentalism that doesn't save you money, and then we'll talk about being green. Like
mm,
that's not primarily a oh we could just send a guy with a drone there and we'll do it for us. It's come on, yeah.
yeah, but I think yeah, if they were wanting to potentially maybe to have the great angle and say like great in the heart of Europe, easy connection, because Basel isn't necessarily as easy, but we'll get onto that in our next video. So I think we're
Mhm.
sort of like wrapping to the end of it to ask for the important question: Basel or Geneva?
For me, Basel. But I'm slightly, as we'll get to in when we talk about Basel, I'm slightly um, biased toward Basel as a city.
Well, I'm completely unbiased and I say Geneva, but I'm going to be honest, that's literally just because of the flight costs.
This is
And
the fight cost, yeah.
yeah,
And honestly, that lake, I've been to the other side of it. It's a great lake. The vibes of sitting on the river on that lake with a beer from Co-op, um, into the night. It's a safe city. It's a good vibe. Like it's going to be fun. Whatever it is, as long as you're prepared to pay Swiss prices for things and work out the wonders of the co-op restaurant, you like Switzerland's going to be a great time. And I think that both cities are going to embrace it. It's
it
just
is
kind of yeah.
interesting you're saying about pricing though, because so many people that I've seen recently who've said to me like, "Oh yeah, actually, Denmark is so much more expensive than Switzerland like in the last few years." So I'm really hoping that what they're saying is right and what you're saying is wrong
I
because I want it to
find,
be
but
cheaper.
Denmark has a cheap like Denmark and Sweden. I found had like have a way to do it cheaply, a way to exist
Yeah,
cheaply, where Switzerland kind of doesn't. Like it's not as good as just at really cheap food and really cheap
apart
sort
from
of things about.
nipping over to France and then taking a suitcase worth of food over.
Exactly, like I used to do when I lived in Switzerland. You literally go across and then you fill a suitcase and you come back because or else you're spending twice what almost like 1.7 times what you're spending on groceries on the side. But yeah, like restaurants are expensive. Getting a kebab is expensive. Getting a beer in a restaurant in a bar is expensive, and there's no kind of back door to that. Like you can't just sort of go to 7-Eleven and get hot dogs in the same way that you can in that you could in Malmo. So that's the concern for me. But it's for most people, it's a once in a year thing. It's the thing you do, and you go out there, and it ties into your holiday, and you have a good time. And Geneva's a great place. Switzerland's a great place, just a great standard of living and a good vibe most of the time.
Yeah, and I think like your fans were prepared to pay
Oh
far too
yeah.
much as we've all paid with our ridiculous ticket prices. Um, hopefully, they maybe Switzerland decide to lower them next year
Ha.
because reasons. But
Yeah.
yeah, these are our thoughts on Geneva. Thank you so much for listening. And if you catch the next one, we will be discussing the other potential host city of Basel. I've been Ewan. Thank you for joining me, Jonathan. This is
Thank you
that
for having
Eurovision
me.
site, and you can listen to our next one in the next video. Bye.
Ciao.